Hi, friend. Moses here. You are wondering what you can do right now to improve the quality of your podcast recording. I'm going to give you just that. I've had a podcast for a little over a year now, producing episodes consistently. And so I feel like I can say a thing or two about it. Okay, so if you only have an audio only podcast, I would say the thing that you can do right now is to control your recording environment. I say this because it is one of the overlooked aspects of podcasting recording. You have to find a quiet environment or an environment that suits the podcast. So, for example, if the podcast is about or it takes place in a coffee shop, it's totally fine to record it in a yeah, it's totally fine to record it in a coffee shop, but ideally, if depending on the level of production that you have, you can record it in the studio, and then you can add sound effects of a coffee shop. Although that kind of takes away from the authenticity of it. As long as your audience gets communicated, as long as you don't trick your audience into thinking that you are in a coffee shop. Okay, so I say this in number one because literally most people do not take that step of controlling the environment that they record in. You don't hear anything right now, and this sound is slightly post-processed. But even though this is not a podcast, I have this environment relatively well protected against outside noises. Even though I wish I could turn this camera around, there's a window right here, and there's a window right there. And what I just did right now, turning away from the microphone, is a good segue into the second tip, which is audio levels. I know that the microphone that I'm recording and the interface does not support any sort of 32-bit float. Don't worry about that if you don't know what that is. So the reason why I say that is because tip number 2 is learning to maintain a relatively stable volume or collection of volume. So if it's you and your friend, or you and a guest, remote or in person, it's important to maintain a level of volume that is not too high and that is not too low. Because if it's too high, then you're gonna have to do all kinds of post-processing to try to bring the volume down. And in doing so, you do lose some sound quality. And that too goes for really, really low sounds. If the sound is way too low and then you have to try to bring it all the way up in post-editing, that can introduce all kinds of unwanted sound artifacts. So, 1, control the environment to the degree that you can actually do that, right? Sometimes we don't have that option. And then 2, try to control the levels, right? And I've already made some of these mistakes, right? Because my chair is squeaky. I don't know. Yeah, it's not doing that right now. And earlier when I was pointing to the window, I turned away from the microphone, which was tip number 2, maintaining levels. By turning away from the microphone, my mouth is no longer pointed at the microphone. And the design of this microphone, it is specifically, designed to, pick up the sounds that are directly in front of it and not on the sides of it. So I'm breaking my own rules, so to speak, or some of the basics of podcast recording. It's fine. It's fine. The third one that I have here is clarity and flow. Clarity and flow, of course, because audio is about podcast is primarily audio, is heavily audio, and so how you say things, how you pronounce things, the enunciation in your pronunciation, I think that works together. It really, really, really matters, right? Because if someone is just listening to you, and I kind of fall at fault with this, right? Because 1, I have an accent, and I have the tendency to speak kind of fast, so I have to try to remember all of that. And sometimes when I have a guest remotely, right, I have to keep in mind that, okay, the internet might lag and there might be all kinds of miscommunication, so I have to double, triple check when I speak and how I speak and the speed at which I speak. It's a lot to think about, but you do it long enough. I'm not saying that I've done it for a long time, but you do it long enough that it starts to be somewhat natural. Okay, so we have controlled our environment. We're trying to speak at a relatively level volume, right? And the third one here, which was clarity and flow, and we're pronouncing things clearly. We're enunciating words relatively well because sound is everything, and some people are listening and they're not watching. And the fourth one here that I have is more of like a hint slash tip, which is audio transitions and audio effects. Now, I put this as a bonus because depending on the level of production that you're at, this goes above and beyond, right? And here is an example where you would need audio transitions and sound effects. Let's say that I'm telling a story about a time that someone broke into my house, right? That really never happened, but let's just say. And as I'm telling that story, I'm talking about how I'm hiding in the closet and someone starts to walk into the living room and the floor is made out of wood. And so I'm hearing their boots, pressing against the floor and there's cracklings. And as I'm describing that, if I can add the sound effects of boots on wood specifically and the crackling of the wood, right? That just takes the listenership experience to a different level, Do you have to do that? Absolutely not. It's a whole different level. You have to have, and it has to be done well, because if it's not done well, then it takes away from the story altogether, right? Sound is a very sensitive thing that I have not even come close to mastering it. Okay, that's all my 2 cents that I have. So if you got any value from this video, give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.